Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate you guys attending this session. Today, we're talking about credible messengers and a qualitative case study of what makes them credible. As I mentioned, my name is Szkola, and I'm the data scientist for Everytown for Gun Safety and an independent researcher. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Kwan-Lamar Blount-Hill, who is an assistant professor at Arizona State University. So, a little bit of background on credible messengers. What is a credible messenger? So they were first explicitly named in the criminal justice context in Operation Ceasefire in Chicago, which eventually turned into Cure Violence. It's an old idea that was borrowed from public health because the person who started Operation Ceasefire, Gary Slutkin, is an epidemiologist. But it was a new application of it. And once this started being applied, they started using credible messengers in all types of different programs, not just gun violence prevention programs. So, what are they? Based on the evaluation literature of programs that use credible messengers, they've been defined in the past as someone who is racially congruent with the neighborhood, they have similar lived experience, and they were reformed. It's not a lot, it's not a strong definition. So there has been one study, mine, that looked at a definition of what makes them credible. This was my dissertation work, and it was a mixed method study. And it's really why this question is important is because the literature on the efficacy of credible messenger programs is mixed. Some programs work, some programs don't, and we don't know why. And possibly, since they rely so heavily on credible messengers, it could be the worker's credibility, but there hasn't been a strong definition of credibility thus far. But I'm going to review what we do know about it based on my other research. So what we know is that there's no one trait that makes people credible. It is something that is like fastest of a gem. There's different aspects of credibility. When we're thinking about these traits, they can be identified as portable and non-portable, so tied to one specific location or able to move between different locations, and static or dynamic, so something that can either be built or it can't be built. It's just a product of who that person is. And all these themes had different levels of support. So the main axis where there were differences was between the line staff and the leadership, with the line staff having a slightly different understanding of what credibility is compared to the leadership staff. So in my previous work, we did find support for authenticity, caring, respect, and neighborhood relationships as being important. So these traits are a mix of traits that are portable, non-portable, and dynamic traits. And that's really neat because we didn't understand that before about this. So that's a new finding for it. So now getting into the individual traits that have found support for credibility. In authenticity and caring, this is a trait where what the workers mean by it is that they really care. They care. They use their sense of self. This isn't just a job for them. It's more than a job. They're invested in it. They're authentic in their caring and in their sense of self. They use themselves. They use their real experiences. They're not just going to tell somebody to do something because it's what the program says they should do. They're going to tell them because they really believe it. They give them authentic advice. And the big thing about this is it does suggest that credibility is not on demographic similarity alone. So it's more than just looking like them or being from a similar area. There is something in the personality about the people that's important too. So respect and neighborhood relationships. This is dynamic. It can be built, right? You could increase your relationships. You can increase your respect. You have to put in work, you have to put in time, but they are tied to specific geographic areas. They're tied to specific social networks. So this has been identified by other researchers, but how it was identified was just being from there. And what we found is that being from there wasn't enough. You also needed to have respect there and have relationships in the neighborhood. So these are the areas I did not find support for. And some of them are odd because they were something that we thought was important based upon how they were described in the evaluation literature. So it's race, the same culture, same neighborhood, and similar lived experience. And I'm going to go into each of these because this is why Kwan and I started this project and are continuing this research. So for race, I found strong support in the interviews, but in the survey, the support was not there. And one of my good friends, David Kaba, actually runs a Cure Violence site in New York City. And when I got my results, I called him up and I'm like, David, what's going on? And he told me bluntly, Jay, you asked the wrong question. It's not whether they're black or brown. It matters that they're not white. That adds to their credibility. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that's why for this project too, we're going in a slightly different direction where we're making it participatory in nature. We're working with participant researchers in addition to Kwan and I in order to get at the nuance that is credibility. So the same culture, this was a similar thing to race. Culture is important, but I asked about it in a very strict way for strict cultural congruence. And it needs to be asked broader, and perhaps not even about the word culture, but about looking the same or talking the same or sharing the street life aspects of that. My favorite quote is over on the right. You can't relate to a thug like a nerd. You got to relate like a thug. And part of that is culture, right? It's how you're relating to them. But the question wasn't asked in a great way. So from the same neighborhood, there was some support in the interviews, but really what was emphasized is being from the neighborhood is great, but if you don't have respect and you don't have relationships there, being from there doesn't mean a lot. Sure, you have some of the similar lived experiences, which is helpful, but you need those respect and relationships too to have that credibility there. Similar lived experience. This was one that really shocked me because in so much of the evaluation literature, this is really emphasized. And it is important, but it needs to be asked about in specific contexts. So if it had support in the interviews, it did not have support in the survey. And in the interviews, it was support for specific aspects of lived experience, not just saying lived experience. It's like growing up in poverty, abandonment, criminal justice involvement. And in this one too, there was a strong divide in the line staff versus the management, where management thought it was more important than the line staff. So this brings me to our current research questions and what we're going to do with this project. And I'll pause here and say, we didn't do the research yet. Our data collection is scheduled. So we're going to talk about methods after this. So research question 1 is, what are the credible messengers, what are the sources of credibility? According to what the findings were before at the supervisory and non-supervisory levels and from the program participants. That's the really unique part of this, is we're bringing the participants to this research. Our second question is, since credibility can be dynamic, how is it earned, maintained over time, and potentially lost? Again, talking about it both from the messengers themselves and from their program participants. The last question we're going to answer is, from the perspective of the messengers, how does the meaning of credibility and the maintenance of it change or shift based on the audience? Does it change based on the participants, the coworkers, community at large? Are there different aspects of credibility that are at play with those different audiences? And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Kwan, who's going to discuss our methods.
All right. So I want to thank you all for your attention so far, and understanding what it is that Jay outlined about what we knew about the phenomena thus far, which is based on just that single study. We decided that it was appropriate to do a really in-depth study to try to figure out the details or the depth of some of the concepts that came out of his research. So first, we knew that whatever study we designed needed to be qualitative, that it needed to provide the ability to really get into the rich contextual depth of the credibility phenomena. And we knew that that would be an exploratory task, that we weren't really sure we would find, even though Jay's work has suggested how some of this phenomena might play out across programs and over time. We chose a case study specifically because of some of the hypothesized interactivity between individuals and the programs that they work in, even the specific social context that they work in, like the catchments, for instance, or the program areas or areas of program responsibility. And so in order to try to hold some of that constant, but focus specifically on changes in credibility between individuals and across individual traits, we really wanted to do a case study where we focus on one organization working in a few designated catchment areas where most of the variation that we observe will be across individuals. Also, we wanted to make sure that this study was participatory. And so we involved folks who actually worked with the organization that we're studying, in part to ensure that there would be buy-in and cooperation with our qualitative study, but also that our study methods and the instruments highlighted the voice of those that we're attempting to examine and indeed will make declarations or claims about. And ensure not just that it included their voice for this kind of representational purpose, which is really important, but made sure that we were able to draw from their knowledge. All right, next slide. Okay, so moving quickly through what we intend to do. There will be three primary methods that we're using to obtain data to analyze this phenomena of credibility. One will be interviews with credible messengers so that we get a view from those folks who are actually seeking to obtain and make use of credibility. Also, we'll have focus groups with program participants so that we're obtaining the view of those who actually accord or grant credibility to the credible messengers, and focus ethnography, which will allow us to have the view of something of a neutral, I put that in air quotes, observer, but someone who's not invested in either obtaining credibility or granting credibility. And we'll be supplementing this with content analysis of media and other documents in the public sphere about the program, as well as internal documents. Next slide. So to start, we'll be interviewing approximately 10 credible messengers. We'll interview each of them twice for approximately 20 interviews. The purpose for this was a couplefold. So one, we wanted to make sure that we got the views of folks to help us frame how we approach our field study in our field notes that'll be jumping into later. But then we also wanted to inform our interviews with our field observations. And so there'll be two interviews that ask slightly different questions, but one of which will inform our field work, the other which will be informed by it. Within the group of credible messengers, we'll also have a kind of smattering of supervisors versus those who are non-supervisors so that we can get the view of those who have to run programs, make decisions about who to hire, and then the views of those who are individually attempting to maintain and make use of their credibility. Next slide. We'll do a focus group, one focus group with 10 program participants. Again, the design of this instrument was done in a participatory fashion to make sure that our questions, even the verbiage and phraseology, reflected what the participants might be most expected to respond to. But this is to get a view of those who will be granting credibility. And we thought that this was really important, one, because to get their direct voices and words on that would be influential in understanding our concept of credibility, but also the practitioners who are trying to generate credibility within these program participants provide a degree of triangulation to make sure that to some degree internal psychological processes that we all think we understand about ourselves but may not fully understand about ourselves can be complemented by the external observations of those attempting to get credibility from us. Next slide. And finally, we wanted to add this this area of focused ethnography, or this methodology of focused ethnography, which itself consists of me and to some degree, Jason personally being able to interact with the program, to observe the program in action, taking field notes, taking observations, doing informal interviewing, that is interviewing outside of a formal structured 1 hour instrument format. And also to have field notes that will be interacted with iteratively. And so as I'm taking field notes, for instance, for my time in the field, I'll be in communication with Jay to get his neutral input in interpreting what it is that I'm observing. And we'll be doing these for 3 of the sites of the program. Next slide. Data collection will take place between June 7th and June 18th. So we'll have more preliminary findings for you soon after that. And then, of course, we'll be publishing and making public the findings that we have from this study to help advance our science of credibility. Do we have any questions? Next slide. I think we just
So,
feel free to jump in.
yep. So that was the end of our formal presentation. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll read them out and try to answer them.
Ah, yes. Okay. So we have a question. Have we published anything about this project? And no, at this point, no. I think, Jay, your work has been made public through your dissertation, so that's published. But specifically coming from this project, we have not published anything on it yet. But we will keep you posted on that, certainly. And I think we have about another 3 minutes to have questions. And thank you, Angela. Yes, definitely. If you have questions that come up after this, we're very happy to respond and answer those. Andres, we do not plan on, okay, the question is, do we plan to interview police officers as well? And no, we do not plan to interview police officers in this particular iteration of the project. And there were a couple other groups also that we might have interviewed. For instance, the community in these programs are really important. Part of it was just managing the size of the study itself. And so we're very interested in focus on this point to with participants and with the credible messengers themselves. But we definitely think that there are lots of layers of other stakeholders that we should be responding to. Thank you for that question. And thank you for your impression of the presentation. Jay, we have a question about the difference between a violence interrupter and a credible messenger. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So what I would say is not all credible messengers are violence interrupters, and not all violence interrupters are credible messengers. It depends on the program model. Some program models, the models that I study in public health, primarily do use credible messengers as violence interrupters, but they also play the role of outreach workers and outreach worker supervisors and program managers and site directors. So credible messenger is a type of person, but they play a variety of roles, where violence interrupter is just a specific role for an individual to play. And in terms of sharing the community violence organization we're working with on this project, I'm not comfortable sharing that just yet. I would need them to agree to it, but I will say it's a community violence organization that's located in the Bronx in New York City.
Thank you for the input on social distance, by the way. That's definitely been one of the theoretical frameworks that we've been considering, particularly around credible messengers and the participants that they're dealing with. So we haven't necessarily applied it with regard to looking at residents, but there are some really interesting questions with regard to that, Andres, particularly given the fact that in some cases, credible messengers have different levels of connection with the communities that they're talking to. And so many of them are residents of those communities or would have lived there, definitely. But some have been gone away, maybe criminal justice involved for a longer period of time. Some are closer in age than others. And so some of the differences and traits of the credible messengers that we're engaged with will allow us to tell some of those differences with regard to social distance, particularly as it relates to social identity.
And I'm going to hop in and answer one more question for Thurman. How the relationship was formed to accomplish this project is I worked for a long time as an internal evaluator at nonprofits in New York City. And I worked to help set up this particular site and have been friends and colleagues with the site director for almost a decade now. So we're really close friends, and he was critical actually in my dissertation too, where I talked out a lot of the results with him to get his input into it.
I have done work in this general space, though I have a less close relationship to the program, which is actually helpful because I'm much less tied to making sure that we say things in one direction or another. So having that dual kind of balancing between a tie to the program and then someone who's aware of the context but less tied to the program was actually helpful for us in thinking through issues of connection versus disconnection, bias versus non-bias.
Yeah, thank you all for coming today. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to either of us. We're always happy to chat about this work.